Hi, you're listening to Football Journeys, a B5 Consultancy podcast with me, Matt Himsworth, and my colleague Fraser Franks.
Football Journeys is a podcast that ignores the glitz and the glamour of the beautiful game in favour of the pain, the graft and the rejection.
In Series 1, we met Liverpool FC's academy class of 2013-14. There were 10 impressive young men who lived a roller coaster through the famous academy at Kirkby and beyond, but ultimately missed out on their Anfield dream. If you haven't yet listened to that series, then we strongly recommend that you do.
From the boy wonder, dubbed the next Steven Gerrard, to the Spanish lads quickly adapting to English culture and football.
The player told at the age of 21 that he'd have to retire before a donation of a new knee gave him a new lease of life and 15 more years of playing.
And even the dramatic story of Darius Warden, who tragically spent time at Her Majesty's pleasure, but is now rebuilding his life.
After 10 episodes, we're moving on from this group of lads to tell more and varied stories.
We're going to finish off this series with a few bonus episodes that will take us in a completely different direction.
We're chuffed in this episode to partner up with Epic Risk Management, the company that Scott Davies proudly flies the flag for. Fraser and I have seen firsthand the work that Epic does in educating, campaigning and raising awareness of problem gambling. There's a time in this podcast where we ask Scott whether he thinks about the possibility that he has saved someone's life through telling his story. In my view, Epic can lay claim to doing that time and time again through their hard graft and getting their message out there. Epic speakers, people who have been through this awful journey through addiction to gambling and also to the modern phenomenon of gaming, tell real and raw stories and help people, both young and old, to recognise the danger signs, change dangerous cultures and habits and to deal with the problems before they get out of hand. You can find Epic on the web at epicriskmanagement.com and they're on social media on Twitter at EpicPGC. That's at EpicPGC on Twitter. Now over to me and Fraser for the latest episode.
This is part 2 of the Scott Davies podcast. If you haven't listened to part 1, we suggest that you do so to fully understand the story. We pick back up with Scott talking about a key moment within his career, when Brendan Rodgers called him into the manager's office.
Yeah, obviously things were going well. Played the first few games, and then one day I got pulled into the office. I don't even know if Brendan will remember it, but obviously it's a massive moment in my life. But he sat me down, and we looked out the window in his office. There was players like Gylfi Sigurdsson, Shane Long, Hal Robson-Kanu that were putting in the hard yards. They were there in the morning doing extra. They were there in the gym doing extra. I would pay the sports scientist 20 quid to tick my name off so I didn't have to have an ice bath, a ticket game to tick my name off so I didn't have to have a protein shake, because I didn't want to do all that stuff. I didn't like it. I'd get in my car and I'd drive out there. And he started to notice me do that. So he said to me, you need to be more like these lads. You're not going to have it comfortably. You're not going to have an easy ride. You've not made it yet at this club. So I was just like, yeah, I can do that. I'm sure I can. The following day, exactly the same happened. I was driving out of the training ground and he pulled me in and he said, listen, he said, I've given you kind of one opportunity. You've not really taken it. He said, what's happened today is not acceptable. And I stopped him in his tracks. I told him that I had a dentist appointment and that's the reason why I had to leave. And he said, if that's the case, he said, you can ring them and prove it to me. And I didn't know what to do. I was sat there. I didn't know where to look. I didn't know what to say. And from that day, I never played another match for the football club. And I'm not saying it was the sole reason, because we'd drawn maybe 2 of the first 4 games and lost 2. But I'd got man of the match in the 2 home games that I played. So I think to myself, well, I can't have done that badly. But I've never sort of sat down with him. I've never met him since and said, I was going through a lot of trouble at the time. If I'd have opened up to you and said to you that I was struggling, how would you have dealt with me? Because I just don't know. People say to me, do you wish you'd have said something? Probably looking back, yes, but I didn't want to cause a problem. I didn't want him to think, well, I can't pick a 21-year-old lad that's struggling with a gambling problem and expect him to perform for me in front of 40,000 people at Newcastle away. And I understand that. But the interesting thing for me was that after that, he got sacked a few months after. And Brian McDermott came in as manager, and I'd gone out on loan to Wycombe Wanderers by this point. But it was only maybe 6 months ago during lockdown that Brian came across my story, and he rang me up and he said, Scotty, he said, I can't believe what I've just read. I've just listened to, just read an article and listened to a podcast that you've done. He said, I can't believe it. He said, like, I never knew that. And I was just like, yeah, I said, it is what it is. And he said, well, let me tell you a story. And this just speaks volumes. It sums up everything that I was about. He said that when Brendan had left and he came in as manager, he was considering putting me back in the team. And he said, I stood and talked to you in the car park one day. And he said, when I was talking to you, he said, you were looking past me. He said, you were looking at the cars. He said, you weren't sort of having a conversation. Everything that I was saying to you was going in one ear and out the other. And he said, now it all makes sense. And I said to Brian, I said, I was at training every single day that I needed to be. I said, but I wasn't actually there. I said, I was just floating through sessions. I said, I had so much going on in my life. I said, I had so many problems. I didn't really want to be at training. I said, so that's probably why. And he said, I wish I could have helped you. And I've got the most wonderful text from that man. And I look at it, I've looked at it a few times since. And I think to myself, do you know what? Fair play to him, because he just said, I wish you'd have told me. I wish I could have done something for you. I wish I could have helped you. But he sent me a great text after we'd spoken on the phone. And it means a lot now, because I realized that what I have to realize is that these managers are only human. They've got kids of their own that are similar ages to me. And if their kids were going through it, they would want to help them. And being a manager, their players are their players. They have to treat them like a family or whatever. But it just wasn't a dumb thing to do. And I've said that a few times, to break that trend and actually go to your manager and say, listen, I'm struggling with gambling. I would have been the first person I know to have done that. I didn't know anyone else that was struggling with it apart from myself.
From that moment, that conversation that you had with Brendan and then even with Brian coming in, you don't get back really in the first team environment. You do a couple of loans. And I think what probably sums up where you were in terms of your mindset, how your life was going, was that loan to Bristol, because you went there and it didn't last for that long. I mean, can you tell us about that trip down?
Yeah. So I had two loans at the back end of that season. One where I went to Wickham and did really well in League One in a struggling team. I don't know, I scored 5 or 6 goals in maybe 15, 16 games, which was okay. Played against Leeds United away on the Saturday. And this is where something happened. I just didn't know how to deal with my emotion. So I got a phone call on the Monday from the chief scout at Leeds. He said that they would be interested in taking me on loan if it was something that I was willing to do. Huddersfield was the other club. They were flying as well under Lee Clark. So I thought to myself, do you know what? I'm going to go to a big club here. Reading's not worked out. I might be able to go elsewhere. On the Wednesday that week, I was sat watching Sky Sports News, and it came up that Adam Clayton signs on loan to Leeds United from Manchester City. That feeling of hurt, disappointment, upset, rejection, embarrassment, I had it all. And rather than go, Dad, like, I'm gutted, I jumped straight in my car, went to my safe place when really it was the most dangerous place I could go. And lost just over £10,000 in an hour and a half. Every single penny that I could afford to lose. I remember getting back in my car, and for the first time in my life, I was just exhausted. I thought to myself, I want this pain to stop. I don't want to sort of be living this life anymore. I felt like my career was completely over, because Reading was all I knew. I'd been there for a long time, and I thought I've ruined that opportunity. I didn't have any money in my account to live a decent life because I was gambling away. My parents pretty much not hated me, but they disliked what I was doing. And I felt like I'd let them down, I suppose, because I was no longer playing at Reading, and they put in the hard grafts, the hard yards and the hard grafts to get me to training for weeks, months on end, taking me over to Reading, which was an hour's drive each way. And that feeling of disappointment, I wanted to just escape from it, and gambling gave me that yet again. So rather than sort of open up about it, it was just go gamble and then deal with the effects of it tomorrow. And as for Bristol, that was just an absolute nightmare. It was an opportunity that I probably should have taken. It was a good club, like I enjoyed it there. But we went and played Leyton Orient on the Saturday. We lost 4-1. The manager said to us, listen, no one goes out tonight. And we had tickets to Chipmunk in Bristol that night. So to tell a squad of lads that you're not going out, even though you've got tickets to Chipmunk, we were like, lads, are we still going? And it's just like, yeah, of course we are. So I was like, right. So I got back to my room and I had £700 left in my account. And I thought to myself, I want to bet this £700 on my phone. The Wi-Fi wasn't great. So I ended up going into Bristol City Centre, went straight to the casino, popped in to see Chipmunk for a bit, back to the casino by myself. And I lost £700 immediately. It was pretty much gone straight away. I'd been drinking and I drove into town. I drove back to my hotel accommodation where I was staying and got back at about 10 to 4 in the morning. And I know this because the manager ends up telling me. So I was walking up the stairs and I was bashing into the doors on either side of this house that we were staying in. And I'd bumped into a door on the left. I'd fallen into the room, didn't think much of it, shut the door, walked along the corridor and went back to my room. The following day we were in for training and the manager said, Scotty, can you stay behind? And I was thinking, oh, he's going to extend my loan here. And he said, listen, he said, what did you do last night? So I said, oh, just watched Match of the Day and had a takeaway. And he was just like, right. He said, do you want to change your mind? And I was like, no. Went downstairs, he showed me his phone and you could see footage of me walking up the hallway at 10 to 4 in the morning. I'd fallen into the room on the left-hand side. It was the assistant manager's room where he was staying with his wife. So he said to me, listen, you've lied to me, pack your bags, get yourself back to Reading. You can explain why you're coming back to the football club. You're leaving early. I got back and I sat down. I don't know if it was Brendan or Brian that was manager at the time. Can't remember. And I was like, listen, the football club shit, the training shit, the food shit, the players are shit. Everything was just not my fault. When really I knew that the common denominator here was me. But that was just something I wasn't willing to tell the club. I thought I can get away with this. But that just shows how two loan moves there. One ended in a lot of money being spent and one ended in me getting sent back to the club.
It's something you've talked to me and Fraser about and helped explain, but just for our listeners, your addiction had turned you into a compulsive liar. And you listing out all those things, when you look back at it now, and now we know the Scotty Davies that you are now, it's outrageous that you would try and level the blame when you were so culpable on it. But being a compulsive liar, I guess it was something that was difficult for you to get out of.
I would lie to anyone and everyone, and that's not me. Like, I genuinely think now, if you spoke to people that have met me that didn't know me 5 years ago when I was gambling, they would say, listen, he's a lovely lad, who'd do anything for anyone. And I'd like to think that. I hate the person that I was, and I try and make amends for it now. I want people to look at me and think, John, he's a good lad, he's a nice lad, he's willing to do things for people. So that's why I've made a complete U-turn. But gambling, I had to lie to be able to do what I wanted. And I had to lie about the money I spent, where I was, who I was with, because if I said that I was with a certain player, my mum knew that I was with him at the bookies. If I said that I was in a town centre, she knew that I was at the bookies. So I had to lie completely. I would pull over in my car, I'd put the radio, I'd go back into my car, turn the radio on, ring my mum and say, oh, sorry, I missed your call. She'd say, where are you? I said, I'm just driving home from training. As soon as I put the phone down, turn the radio off, shut the car and go back into the bookies. So that was the sort of thing that I had to do to be able to try and sort of con people. And I'm conning my nearest and dearest, but I was willing to do it for the sake of my addiction.
Wow. So you get sent home from Bristol. Your contract, I presume your contract is running down, is it? And you just don't get it renewed. So you're then at a point. You've gone from being at a point where a high-flying Huddersfield and massive club like Leeds are interested in you, to being out of contract at Reading. And respectfully to Crawley Town, which is a good football club, but that's where you end up. I guess that a couple of years before, you wouldn't have expected that would be where you'd end up.
No, I think as well, during that season, so as soon as I fallen out of the first team at Reading, there was talk about signing for Bristol City. So Bristol City came in for me for apparently £250,000. And Reading wanted 400 grand, and they were saying, like, no chance. So when they seen that I'd stopped playing, it was almost like, well, we'll have him. Like, he's still a young lad. He's obviously got potential. When it got to January, I think this was October time, when it got to sort of January, the manager sat me down and he said, listen, we're willing to sell you back to Wycombe for 25 grand. And I'm thinking, well, you've turned down bids in whenever it was, but you're willing to sell me now for 25 grand. They knew that at the end of the season, they were getting rid of me. All right. And they obviously just wanted to recoup some of their money. But I just thought to myself, how has this happened so quickly? So I sat opposite my manager, Gary Waddock at the time, when I was at Wycombe, and he said, listen, we can buy you. We'll give you a 4.5-year contract, £1,500 a week the whole way through. And I was thinking to myself, no way am I signing for Wycombe, because I could go and make it elsewhere at a big club. I still believed that I could. And I think Crawley, for me, gave me that opportunity. The plans that they had, the players that they were signing, the finances that they had, it should have gone. But to be fair, we got promoted in the first season. It did go well, but I expected them to be in the Championship within a few years. That's the sort of plans that they had and the money they were spending. But they gave me sort of £30,000 sign on for him, which was probably bad news, because I knew that £30,000 was just going to get wasted. £1,500 a week and £2,000 a week in the second year of my contract. I know a lot of people don't speak about money, but for me, it's part and parcel of what I speak about every day. So it's not me being flash, because it's not tens of thousands of pounds, and I'm not fussed about what people know, what I earn. But yeah, it gave me the chance to carry on what I was doing, I guess.
And that £30,000 signing on fee, I guess someone might look at that and go, look, that's your opportunity, clear your debts out, pay your mum and dad back. But I guess when you've got an addiction, that you'd probably be better off not getting a signing on fee, because it's quite dangerous for an addict, isn't it?
Yeah, my mum and dad didn't ever want their money back. He was a retired policeman by this year. By the time I signed for Crawley, he was a retired copper, and he'd had a big lump sum of his pension. They paid their mortgage off. So it's almost like, we don't need your money back. Just make sure that you're doing things right and proper, and we'll be fine. So when I did sign for Crawley, my mum and dad had my bank card for 6 months by this point. They took my bank card off me when I lost the £10,000 in the bookmakers that day. So they were sort of saving money for me to put towards a deposit for a house. With the first part of my signing on fee, I had just over £30,000 saved up as a deposit. went away on a pre-season tour to Portugal, and I met the real Steve Evans for the first time. So things blew up after a match out there. I didn't know how to deal with him because it was new to me. I say it was new to me. My dad actually had a fight with him in the car park a few years before this. But he ended up screaming and shouting at me after a game, and I got up and I walked along the pitch and walked away from him. So the next 6 days, I had to train by myself in isolation in my room. I wasn't allowed to eat with the boys. So I started to gamble some of the deposit for my house. And 15 days later, from the first bet that I had in Portugal to 15 days later, every pound of the £30,000 had gone. I'd gambled it completely away. So that was a telltale sign for my parents that this problem hasn't got any better. It's clearly got a lot worse. So yeah, that was tough to come clean to my parents and tell them the truth around that.
Did you get any kind of reputation within football? Were there people? I know your loan spell, you got sent back, and you had a few things at Reading. I know not many people knew about it, or if any. But did you have a reputation for being a bad egg or anything like that? I know you were performing on the pitch, and you're probably hiding a lot of the gambling. But were there any whispers within football, within the changing room, that, "Oh, Scotty's not right," or "Scotty's doing this," or "He's a bad egg," or "He's unprofessional," that kind of thing?
I think for me, this is what I said at the beginning about being in a man's changing room from the age of sort of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. I used to see my dad and his teammates and the banter that they had. It was brutal. So I kind of learned at a young age. So when I went into men's football, I wanted to be the show pony, I guess. I think to myself that I used to be involved in absolutely everything. I never had I was never known as a bad egg, and I don't think my teammates would have said, "Oh, do you know what? I don't like him. He's a twat," or anything like that. I just wanted people to accept me. I wanted people to like me, and I was always the loudest. So for me, I think that when I was at Crawley, there was some big characters and things like that, but I carried on being the way that I was. But I wanted to just make people laugh. But then I realised at times, and looking back now, in a professional environment, sometimes it's time to work, but I would be the person that would carry on the banter throughout the training session. So when I was at Aldershot, for example, we went on to a walk to Asda on the Friday night with my teammates. And I remember being in there with them, and all of a sudden I've lost them. So I'm outside the shop and I'm thinking, like, where have they all gone? They must have gone ahead of me and left. So I thought, I'm not walking back by myself. So I stole someone's dog from outside the shop. I walked the dog back to the hotel. I've walked into the hotel reception. The dog's walking along the floor. I'm like, "Come on, boy, come on." So we get in the lift, and I'm stood opposite the dog. And I'm thinking, what am I doing? But I knew that I'd get a laugh out of the boys, so that's why I did it. I've knocked on the door, and Nicky Balls answered the door. So he's answered the door and walked away so we could go and play cards again. There's like 7 or 8 people in there. And the dog sat down by the side of the bed, and I've gone, "Arf." Next thing, the dog's barking, and they're going, "Fucking hell, Scotty, like, what is that?" So I said, "I've taken the dog back from Asda." And I said, like, "You lot left me, so I brought the dog back." So they were like going mad. They said, "Listen, you've got to take the dog back." And I was like, "Yeah, of course we will." So I took the dog back. The bloke who was walking around the car park looking for his dog, I said, "Mate," I said, "I found your dog down the road." And he was just like, "Oh, mate, you like hero, saviour." He gave me 20 quid for finding his dog. And I was like, "Oh, cheers, mate." I went back and played cards. But looking back now, that's the sort of thing that I wanted to do because I wanted to please people. I wanted to be accepted and I wanted to make people laugh. But I didn't know where to turn that on and off because I was just 100 miles an hour the whole time.
Do you know what? What's really interesting about that story is like accepted norms, because there's 2 ways you can look at that story. You can look back at it and it's quite funny, and people tell stories about Gaza doing silly things like that. But when you really look at it, it was an outrageous thing to have done. You've stolen someone's family pet. It's respectfully, it's a disgraceful thing to have done. But there's a kind of environment within football, and within sort of masculine environments where us banter and it's showing off, and it's a beautiful story, which in a way that it shows where your mindset was, where your troubles were coming from. It's the expectation of who Scott Davies is supposed to be, whereas actually it probably wasn't the real Scott Davies. It was some kind of facade, some show off, some trying to prove that you are this image that sometimes football and masculine environments create for themselves, I think.
Yeah, I was caught in this bubble, I think. I remember being even at Reading when I was in the youth team, I got told off by the manager. He brought me into the office, and as I walked into the office, there was another player's parents in there. And I thought to myself, like, have you got the wrong player in here? Like, what are his mum and dad doing in here with me? And it was a bullying case. So what they deemed as bullying, I just deemed as banter. And they said to me that you've been saying this to my son, that you've been saying that to my son. And I was like, yeah, but I don't mean it. But then on reflection, you can't deem that to be acceptable now. Like, I realize that now, because what might be bantered to you might be hurtful to someone else. And I didn't mean it with any sort of meaning to it at all. But over the years, I've realized that people need to sort of like stem the flow of their banter, and you don't understand how it's affecting people differently. But it took me a long time to realize that, if I'm brutally honest, again. So
well, just before we get to 2015, which is a really important year and an important part of your recovery from everything, I wanted to bring it a little bit closer home. So you talk about dressing room environments and relationships. I think one thing that's come across in some of our chats with you before is that you almost didn't really have the ability to form healthy relationships. Well, I guess in a way with your mum and dad, and also you talk about your granddad, who was your best mate and your hero, but also with partners as well, romantic partners. And I think you had a sort of on-off relationship around that time, which was a mess because of your addiction.
Yeah. So I tried to have girlfriends throughout the whole time of playing football, but the thing that got me out of bed in the morning was gambling. And all I wanted to do was gamble, like I said, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I really did. So when I was watching Hollyoaks with them in the evening, I used to get my mate to text me, and I changed his name to Mum in the phone book, get him to text me saying, Scotty, I need you home for dinner. So I'd be like, oh, here we go. Like, my mum needs me home, dinner's ready. And I'd leave there, go straight to the bookmakers and sit in there all evening. So that's the sort of thing that I used to do. And there was one occasion where we were on the train going to London, and I'd got tickets to go and see The Lion King for Christmas, for a Christmas present. But what I'd paid for is the tickets. I still had to pay for the hotel, I had to pay for the train, and I had to pay for food when I got there. And I thought to myself, well, this is going to be a bit tricky, because the night before I'd lost £3,500 gambling, and I'd spent the money that I'd sort of put aside. So halfway on the way to London, I thought, I need to get myself out of this situation. I walked down to the toilets, I ripped the tickets up and threw them out of the train. And she said, like, what have you just done? Why have you done that? And I said, oh, we've come a month too early. I said, we've got the wrong day. By the time the next month came, we had to get off the train and go home. By the time the next month came, we'd broken up, because I was doing things that she didn't realize why I was doing them. And it was only when I went to rehab a couple of years later that I had to ring her and apologize for everything that I did, as part of the resentment and guilt and lies and all this. The counsellor said to me, listen, you've got to ring this girl up and apologize, because she's probably beating herself up for having a failed relationship when you're the problem. So I remember ringing her up and telling her why I did this, why I did that. And she said, it all makes sense now. And I was just like, well, I was just living two separate lives. I said, like, I was living a lie, to be brutally honest. And then, yeah, it was just one of those things. She didn't have any idea about it, but that's the sort of situations I got myself in that I had to get myself out of.
So before we get to 2015, I think it's important that we track it alongside your football career, because you left Crawley Town. I wouldn't say you played a handful. You played a decent amount of games, but not what you'd have expected to play. You expected to go in there and be one of their best players and march up to the championship and everything else. You had a loan back at Aldershot Town. You then end up at Oxford United, and I think Kassam Stadium, the history of Oxford United, that looks like a big move, but that really was a part of your downward trajectory. I mean, I think you were being paid peanuts at Oxford United by that stage. So your football career is really falling at that stage.
Yeah, I think at Crawley was where it was either going to make or break me. That season, we actually got promoted. I played, I think, the last 14 games of the season. So I was put back into the team and did really well. But then some of the stuff that happened at Crawley is that I started to bet on my own matches and things that was disappointing. I had bailiffs turn up at my house on a Sunday morning to pay a bill that I hadn't paid. So I ended up putting bets on matches to try and accumulate money so I could pay these debts. And I never got caught for it. And probably the worst thing that ever happened, because it told me that I had to do it every week, because I thought I could get away with it. And I'm disappointed that I've ever done it. And I've come clean to the FA about what I've done, and I apologised. And I said that I'm trying to use my experiences now so other players don't go down that same route. There was other things that I did. I crashed my car on the way home watching a horse race. There was a child sat in the car seat of the opposite car. I slept in my car after training.
So sorry, just on that crash, you've got a horse race on your mobile phone whilst driving along. You're not looking, and you could have seriously injured yourself or that family.
Yeah, I just couldn't put my phone down. And I know it's crazy to say, but I crashed into the side of a car, and we pulled over at a school not far from my parents' house. And I remember thinking to myself, right, just tell him you're falling asleep at the wheel. You play football, you're falling asleep at the wheel. So that's what I said. Then I looked in the back seat of his car, and there was a kid sat in the car seat. And straight away this feeling of guilt just came over me, because I thought to myself, what am I doing? I felt like a scumbag, and I knew that I wasn't. But I gave him £500. I had £500 stuffed underneath my handbrake, because I'd won some money that day, and gave him the money, said, go and fix your car. But when I went to bed that night, I remember sort of completely crashing. I thought to myself, like, this has got to stop. I didn't want the authorities to get involved, because I thought if the police turn up, they can check my activity on my phone, see that I've been on WhatsApp, been on William Hill, and I could end up in prison for this. But it led me to some dark times at Crawley. I was overspending the money that I had in the bookmakers in Crawley. I didn't have enough money to get home from training. I would go and park in a service station, sleep there in my car. I'd sleep in lay-bys. I'd sleep at the stadium, park around the back of the ground. Not have any dinner, go straight to training in the morning. And people would say to me, like, why have you still got your match day suit on from the game the night before? And I'd have to just come up with lies. But yeah, as a professional footballer, you shouldn't be doing that. But that's what it led me to.
What's that doing to your body at that stage, Scott? I mean, what kind of shape are you in?
I'll send you a photo that I tweeted out about 6 weeks ago. I don't know if you've come across it, but one pre-season to Crawley, at Crawley to the next pre-season, I must have put close to 2 stone in weight on. And it was quite staggering, because I didn't see it in myself. I sat in a bucket chair in Betfred at the end of the first season, ordering takeaways to the bookmakers, eating them with Jenny and Helen, my 2 best mates in the bookies, 2 ladies that work behind the till. And I put on so much weight that when I went back to pre-season, people were laughing at me, and I'm thinking, like, why are you laughing? And it was only 6 weeks ago that I came across this photo, and I thought to myself, wow, like, I got exactly what I deserved. And I never played another match for the club after that. Until December the 20th, the chief exec brought me in and said, I can't have you sitting around here on £2 a week, just coming to watch matches. I need you at the club. And we managed to come to some negotiation to leave.
You said there, Scotty, about you were betting on your own games. Was there, what was you betting on in the bookies? Was there a specific thing that sucked you in, or was it just anything that you could get your hands on, or anything that you could watch in the bookies or on your phone?
Yeah, I kid you not. I would sit at a roulette machine in the bookmakers. I would bet on the horse, and I'd bet on the dog races, and I'd basically leave like one of the slips over the machine when I was going to put a bet on a horse or a dog, and I'd run back and sit there. So I'd always watch the horse and dog race from the roulette machine seat. So I'd have a bet on everything that was going on. Whereas some people do it strategically, they do it responsibly, and they just bet on horses they like the look of. Whereas I had to have a bet on everything. So I constantly had 3 bets going on, because there's a dog race, I think, every 14 minutes. There's a horse race every 5 or 10 minutes on some days. So I was just constant buzzing around. I think I did more steps in the bookies than I did at training. It was like that. It was mental. But it's like you say, I think at the beginning it was roulette. It turned into horses, and then all of a sudden, when it went on to online, I'm betting on baseball in America that I've never watched before in my life, and I'm thinking, this is class. I'm betting on basketball, horse racing in Thailand, and I'm thinking, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, what am I doing? But I still knew that what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself from doing it.
And when you talk about those betting on your games, now, I mean, to be clear, you weren't seeking to influence those games, but you could pick games that you thought Crawley Town were going to lose.
Yeah, it's something that I look back and I think to myself, like, it's not right, it's not good. But I was just a broken man, if I'm brutally honest. And that's not me feeling sorry for myself, but I knew that the only person that would pay my debts and pay my bills was me, unless my mum and dad had to do it. And I didn't want them to do it at this stage. I was exhausted from what I was doing. So I started to do it discreetly, getting other people to put bets on for me. And it didn't mean that I tried less hard in terms of when I did play in those matches, but subconsciously I probably did, looking back at it now. But it's like you say, the FA said that to players, you can't bet on football, you can't do this, you can't do that. My mum said to me, please don't bet. My dad said to me, please don't bet. I told myself, don't bet, but I couldn't stop for anyone. So how am I meant to stop for rules and regulations when I've got an addiction? It's like saying to an alcoholic, listen, I'm going to chuck you in a brewery for the next year, but I don't want you to have a drink. Like, do you know what I mean? You can leave him with all the drink in the world. And it's like all of a sudden you have to just switch off. I couldn't just switch off one day when the FA implemented these rules and said, you've got to stop betting on football, because my problem was a lot further down the line than other people's, I guess.
And there was a promise you kind of made you wanted to stop before your granddad passed as well. And forgive me for bringing up what's obviously would be really emotional. I think you wrote a letter. Was it a letter you wrote actually to your granddad or to your parents saying, I'm going to stop in his life?
Yeah, so when I lost the deposit for the house, I went to get help for the first time in my life because I knew I couldn't do it by myself. My mum and dad couldn't help me. I went to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting in Watford. So you sit in a room full of like-minded people. And the first guy that spoke was stealing from work to fund his addiction. And I looked at him and I thought, you're a lunatic, mate. Like, what are you doing? The second guy had done a street robbery to take someone's Rolex. And I was like, you're crazy as well. So I went home to my mum that night and I said, listen, I've got all the answers to the questions that I wanted answering. I said, I know what I need to do. I said, the people that go to those meetings are just a lot different to me. I said, like, I've not got a problem compared to them. So I wrote a letter that night on my granddad's life and I put it in a folder. It's probably still in the folder now, I kid you not. They said, I swear on my granddad's life, I'll never gamble again. And I signed it and I dated it. And I didn't gamble for 4 days. And that was the longest I didn't gamble for 10 and a half years. But those 4 days were the longest 4 days of my life. I just didn't know what to do with myself after training. Like watching daytime TV is just something I never did. I didn't play computer games. I didn't listen to music. I never went for walks. I didn't really sit and talk to people. All I knew what to do was to go to the bookmakers. So when you took that out for 4 days, I was just desperate to get back to it. And it didn't take long before I was back on the horse and riding it, I guess.
And so your career starts to fall away, your footballing career, really, effectively. You moved to Oxford United. Am I right in saying that you're on something like £200 a game at Oxford United?
Yeah. So Chris Wilder rang me up and he said, I tried to sign you last summer, put in a 50 grand bid and it got rejected. And he said, now you're obviously a free. He said, I'm desperate to sign you. He said, but we've got no money in the budget, not even £1. He said, I've managed to get £200 a game out of the chairman. He said, you've had your pay up from Crawley. So will you come down and sign for us? And I was thinking, yeah, I can do that. It was a good club and it was a stepping stone into signing a longer deal. So I signed for them. I'm obviously earning £1,000, £1,200 a month now. So my money's going a lot quicker. At this point also, I've gone to the bank with the pay up that I had at Crawley. I got £28,000 that Christmas to leave the club. I went to the bank with my mum and dad and I sat up with my bank manager and I asked for a loan for a mortgage. And they pretty much just laughed at me. They said to me, over the last 30 days, there's been £9,500 transacted to betting companies. From tomorrow, you don't have a job and you pay £180 a month in overdraft fees. My dad got the mortgage in his name. It was the biggest mistake he's ever made because they ended up going on to lend me around £60,000, paying my mortgage, my phone bill, my car insurance, paid for absolutely everything. So that £1,200 a month wasn't being used in the way that it should. But fortunately for me, I got another deal at Oxford on £800 a week, which was a little bit better.
But you were only at Oxford for, what was it, 2 seasons?
Yeah, so a year and a half. I went to pre-season training that year, went to a place called Rivington near Bolton to a Marine camp. And I got a video sent to me not long ago of that Marine camp. And it was quite shocking yet again to see the difference in me to everyone else. And I think that I knew my time was coming to an end. I think during that season, I really, really did struggle. I had some dark days living by myself. And I think that I'd lost my identity as Scott, the promising footballer, or Scott, the sort of like bubbly character, because I think that exhaustion was just starting to sort of overcome me now. I couldn't cope with it anymore. And then during that season, like I said, I was just floating around. I was going to training, but I wasn't having any impact on the games that I was playing. And at the end of the season, the thing that spoke volumes for me out of everything that's ever happened in my career is the man that signed me twice at Aldershot, signed me twice at Wycombe, Gary Waddock, had come in as manager about 3 months before the end of the season. And I thought to myself, I'm rubbing my hands here. This is a guy that loves me. And he said to me, as long as I have a club in football, you'll have a club. He released me at the end of the year. So that, for me, spoke volumes. And I thought to myself, well, if he's not going to sign me, then no one else in the whole world is going to sign me, because this guy absolutely loves me. And the respect for each other was mutual. So I had to completely change my life around after that, and my professional career was over.
So that summer, June 2015, and I know you kind of that date. It's a date that you've said out loud a million times. I think I'm right in saying the 8th of June or 18th, 8th. The 8th of June 2015. That, I guess, was the beginning of the rest of your life.
It was. I was in the bookmakers and I just put a bet on a horse. And I went over to the till to collect my money. It was actually a winning bet. Helen and Jenny, my 2 best mates, in there yet again. And they weren't giving me attention that I craved. And I thought to myself, usually I go over, we have a bit of banter. And if I win big, I go, here you go, there's a fiver, there's a tenner, whatever it is. I tip them. Hour later, I've usually got no money. So I'm thinking, why am I tipping these people? So I looked around at the door and I saw my mum in floods of tears crying her eyes out. I ran over to the door and stupidly asked her a blasé question. I was like, "You all right?" Like, knowing full well that I've just come out of the bookmakers and she hates seeing me in there. And she said, "No, I'm not." She said, "You need to stop gambling. You're going to end up dead, or you're going to break up mine and your dad's marriage." So I sheepishly got back in my car. I drove to the 2-bed flat that I was now living in. And my dad rang me that evening and he said, "Do you not realise what you're doing to your mum?" He said, "You're making your mum ill." I find her downstairs at 2, 3, 4 o'clock every single night, Googling how can I help my son with a gambling problem. And that made me feel really guilty about what I was doing. Probably the first time in my life it really hit home. My professional career had been over for a year by now. I was playing for Wealdstone in the Conference South. And the following evening, I did the most stupid thing that I've ever done. And I'm not saying that I started cutting chunks out of me or anything like that, but I was cooking some food and I started scratching myself with the tip of a knife. And when I started doing it, it's almost like that pain was taken away for a second. And that scared me more than anything because I knew that it wasn't normal to do it. So I got in my car, I drove to my parents' house. I said to my mum what I'd been doing. And I said, "I feel like I'm having a breakdown." She turned around and she doesn't swear, but she said, "Thank fuck you finally admitted it." So we stood in the living room, we hugged, we cried. And she just said, "Listen, I'm going to get you help," because she'd done all the research in terms of where I could go and get help. She knew the number that I had to contact straight away. And I didn't feel strong enough to ring that number. I didn't have the power in me to do it because it seemed like a massive task to actually ring a rehab centre. So she rang them, put them on the phone to me. So the following day, I went down there for an assessment to see whether I needed 26 days residential treatment where I packed my bags and moved in, or it was going to be one-to-one counselling for an hour a week and they come to your house and do it. And I was the 26 days residential that I needed.
And this was Sporting Chance, which is obviously paid for by the PFA. 26 days you spent there, which sets out how serious your illness was. But one thing that really occurs to me when you told that story is you were finally being honest with your mum and with yourself. And I think it's that honesty that allows the recovery, isn't it? Because all the while you lie to yourself that you're coping with it and you're dealing with it and it's not a problem, the problem's going to continue. That minute you were honest with your mum, and I imagine obviously you can tell this story now without a lot of emotion in it, but I imagine, the emotion between you and your mum at that point must have been absolutely vast and huge.
Yeah, I think for me, it took me to lose my career, to actually want to recover and want to get better. People call it an illness, but I'm very reluctant to call it that because I think that I'm proof that there is a life after it. Like, I love my life to bits now, and it's not like a serious illness that could be terminal for such. I think that people refer to it as an illness. For me, it's more of a disorder. So it's like you say, that time was really difficult, but I remember sort of going into rehab thinking to myself, "Do you know what? I've had enough. I need to listen to every single word that the counsellors say to me." My parents warned me and said, "Do not dare come home early," because players have been known to go there for 4, 5, 6, 7 days and go home after a week thinking that they've recovered and they're fine. So it was on the 21st day. I hadn't seen my parents for 3 weeks and they came in to speak to me with the counsellor. I said, "I'm sorry for all the lies that I told, the money that I've taken, the heartache that I've caused, the regrets of my career, of all the hard work that you've put in." I said, "I'm sure you're disappointed in me," and things like that. And it was really emotional. My dad's not the kind of person that cries, but I could see that he was tearful. My mum was in absolute bits. I was crying my eyes out. And so was my sister, my brother-in-law were there as well. And my dad turned around and he said to me, "From today," he said, "if you gamble again," he said, "we're going to disown you. It's as simple as that." He said, "We cannot live our life or the rest of our lives going through what we have done in the last 10 years. And I didn't realize the heartache and pain that I've really caused my parents. To hear that from two people that I love more than anyone in the world and two people that I need in my life more than anyone in the world, it stopped me going back to what I was doing for the previous 10 years. So every time that I did come out of rehab and I had an urge to bet, I had my dad in my ear telling me it, and it kept me on the straight and narrow. And it's been just over 5.5 years now without a bet. But that was probably the best one line that he's ever said to me, because I didn't like the person I was. I didn't like what I was up to. And the last thing I wanted to do was lose my family.
Now, hearing those words and being able to really understand what your mum and dad went through, did that help you to understand what a parent and child relationship really is? Because I say this as a dad myself, and I know Fraser will as well. And I look at the way that your life was. You weren't able to have relationships, and that's what, where this story becomes, the uplifting one that is now, what Scott Davies is now in a relationship. I think you're getting married this year, is that right?
Yeah.
You now understand relationships. You understand what it feels like to love someone else more than you love yourself. And I think of that as a dad, and I feel quite emotional thinking about your mum and dad and how they would have done anything for you, and they did do anything for you. Was it that point at which you started to understand what that must be like, and now looking forward to your future with your fiance, who will be a wife and family that you might have?
Yeah, for me, it completely stripped back stripped me of all my morals, my principles. Because I said it before and I say it again, I'm not a bad person, but gambling completely stripped me of all my good things, my positive things. And I think that I knew my mum was living my life with me. And when I look back and I think, well, I wanted to stop for me, I didn't really stop for me. I stopped for my mum, but that was good enough at the time. It was good enough to stop for someone else that you cared and loved about. And people say to you, you shouldn't stop for anyone but yourself. Like, you have to do it for yourself. But I don't believe in that, because I think that I'm proof that you can do it for other people. Because at the time, when you feel completely worthless, you feel like you've lost your identity, you've got nothing to get up for in the morning, you've not got a job Monday to Friday, and you're playing for Wheelstone, how can I stop for someone that's got no value to them? Like, I felt like I had no value whatsoever, if that makes sense. So I needed to do it for someone that had their ship in order, I think, if I'm brutally honest. And I think to myself now, during that time in rehab, for all of the things that I achieved in football, it wasn't much. You don't go onto my Wikipedia page and see like honours list and it goes on. Playing in front of people in the Championship was a great experience. Playing for Ireland was great, but completing rehab for me was probably the most successful achievement I've been through in my life, because I was lost. I was a lost, lonely little puppy, walking around thinking to myself, like, what do I do with my life now? And it's given me a platform to stand on my own 2 feet again and start moving forward in a positive direction. Like you say, I would never have thought that 5.5 years ago I would say to you, I'm going to get married, because I couldn't even spend 5 minutes with someone, because I just didn't want to. I thought to myself, why would I want to spend time with you? But it's completely changed my life. Yeah.
Your story, it also comes almost a little bit full circle, because we started off when we chatted to you, we talked a little bit about non-league football, and we talked about your dad, who, I get a really strong impression of him as this really tough, almost hard copper, who had a really good career in non-league football. He's got a job which gives back to society, and he's enjoying playing football for the love and the joy of football in front of a couple of hundred people, in front of a couple of hundred people that really care about their football. And then I look at you now, playing at a place like Oxford City, Chelmsford City, Slough Town. You've been at Biggleswade, Staines, Harlow, Kingstonian, proper good. There's nothing wrong with that though. There's a good non-league football clubs, and also doing a job with Epic, which gives back to society and does the right thing. I mean, without wishing to put words in your mouth, if I were you, I'd be more proud of where you sit now than where you were with your prodigious footballing talent, where, you're at a big club like Reading and whatever else.
Yeah, I think, listen, I'm addicted to football. If there's one thing I'm addicted to now, I would say that there's no one in the world in non-league football, that loves football more than me. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. And I think that's where I struggle at times, when I see other people that I believe that I was better than, that are playing in these leagues. They're doing really well, but I've got to be grateful for what I've got and what's about to happen in my life, because if I wasn't, I would beat myself up every day. There's one thing that me and my mum came across. I think it was Take That's album. It's called Look Back, Don't Stare. I'm sure it was Take That. And I think for me, that is the best little slogan you could ever come up with, because if I look back at everything that's gone on in my life and I stared at it, I wouldn't ever be able to move forward. And I think that's one of the most important things for me, that I look back and I actually respect what's happened, but just try and make amends for what I do now. And obviously playing football now in the Conference South and things like that is great. Obviously doing the job that I do. At 16 years old, if someone said to me, oh, when you're 32, you're going to go around and tell your story around gambling and how it became a problem for you, I'd have been like, no, I don't want that. But for me, it's the best job in the world. I still get to go into football clubs every day. I still get to see my old managers. I still get to see my old teammates. And I get to have the banter with the lads, where I can combine my two passions in helping people with gambling problems and gambling related harm, while still playing football and doing a job that I enjoy. So I'm very fortunate. A lot of people don't manage to turn it around. A lot of people relapse and go back to gambling, alcohol, drugs, things like that. But my best medicine is that I can talk about my problems every single day. And I don't want to be the person that says, oh, do you know what? I slipped up yesterday and I had a bet. Because for me, that would be a real dig in the ribs. I'd hate to do that.
Something me and Matt spoke about this week. We've been speaking to someone that we're potentially going to be working with, and something that's come up is I'm a big believer that some of the worst experiences that you go through and some of your worst times of your life can present some of the best opportunities. So if I look at some of the people that I know and me and Matt work with, I think the way that I retired for a heart condition and what I do now, I wouldn't have been able to do that if this bad thing didn't happen to me. I've got a friend that's beaten cancer twice that goes around clubs, and that's a big part of his story. You've got parents that have lost children and that, and they go around and they console other parents that have gone through the same thing. Your worst experiences and all your bad times in gambling, now you're giving back and telling your story and trying to affect it in a positive way. And you've got this opportunity. So how did that come up, and when did you first start telling your story again? And was it a challenge? Because when you're being very open and honest with us here and allowing yourself to be vulnerable, was it always that easy when you first started?
For me, when I came out of rehab, my mum said to me a month after I came out, she stood in the kitchen, she said, I feel like I finally got my son back. And being a young lad, you brush it off. You're like, Mum, don't be stupid. I was like, get off me. Like, do you know what I mean? She's trying to give me a hug or something. And I was just like, Mum, I was like, I've been here the whole time. She went, Scotty, you haven't. She said, you've not been part of this family for a long time. And she asked me the question, what does your sister do for a job? And I was like, I don't know. And that for me, yet again, it hit home. I thought to myself, how do I not know what my sister does? And it did take me away from my family. I went and studied a degree through the PFA when I left rehab as a focus. It gave me something to look at Monday to Friday. Opening up my laptop was okay, but I wanted to walk in a football environment and have the banter. But the job came about 2 or 3 months after. I got a phone call from Sporting Chance, and they said, we believe that you can string a sentence together, that you can go and tell your story. We've got Norwich City first team on Thursday this week. And I was thinking, no way am I going to Norwich City first team to tell my story. They don't want to hear about the lad that's lost a couple of grand on different occasions when they're earning 50 grand a week. So I got roped into it. I went there and I did it. And I've got to say that Russell Martin made it easy for me. So I knew Russell through a friend of a friend kind of thing. And I said to him, listen, can you tell Russell that I'm coming in to do the talk? It's my first ever time. Just tell him to go easy on me. So I did the talk, and there was a lad at the front called Mbakani. I don't know if you remember him with the dreads. He's now playing in Belgium. And he fell asleep at the front. And that was the worst thing that ever happened, because I thought to myself, like, how boring must I sound? But after it, Russell stood up and he was like, listen, that was brilliant, Scotty. Like, really appreciate that. Thanks for coming. And after that, it gave me the buzz to go and do it again, because I thought to myself, I'm hearing it from someone that I respect, club captain and whatnot. So I became the public speaker for Sporting Chance. One day I was speaking at a conference up in London, and Epic were there. So Paul Buck, the CEO, and Mark Potter, one of the employees, they were there, and I was on a panel talking about gambling in sport. So after, they just approached me and said, listen, we've got this new project with the EFL and Sky Bet over the next 5 years. We've got to go to every single club once in the next 5 years. We want you to run with this program. And I sort of heard about it at first, and I was like, is this like serious? I've never heard of a responsible gambling like project being run at football clubs before. I didn't know anything about it. We stayed in touch over the next sort of 4 or 5 months while contracts got signed between Paul and EFL and Sky Bet. And that's what I do now. So I've got to go to every single club once a year for the next 5 years. We're 2.5 years through it. And I just absolutely love what I do. I know the cliche, find a job that you enjoy and you never have to work another day's work in your life. That is me to a T. And I'm not saying it for the cliche or to please Paul. I just absolutely love it. Like, I've got a call at 4 o'clock this afternoon with Mansfield under 18s. And it's not the most glamorous of clubs, but I treat it like the same. And for me, it's just the best medicine I can have. I enjoy doing what I do.
Do you ever think to yourself, Scott, in the presentations that you give, interviews like this podcast and other podcasts you've done, you've got a great article in The Guardian, you telling your story, do you ever think to yourself, I might have said something that's influenced a young man or young woman that may have even saved their life?
Yeah, do you know what? It's really difficult. I get so many plaudits like on people that have gambling problems that text me saying, like, honestly, mate, you don't understand what you've done for me by just reaching out and speaking to me. A lot of people text me and say, hi mate, I've seen your story. I don't expect you to reply. They think I'm like Lionel Messi or something like that, but I don't expect you to reply, but I'm really struggling at the moment. Of course I'm going to reply. Like, who am I to not reply to someone that's going through the hardship that I went through in terms of gambling? So I've replied to every person, and then I might get a text 3, 4, 5 months down the line from that person again saying, listen mate, you've completely changed my life around. I'm back with my girlfriend, I'm happier than ever. I've spoken to people that are in dark places. There was one guy that was on a bridge down in Chichester, and I managed to get some contact that was closer to him that could go and help him. There's all sorts of different stories, but we always say that people that work for this company, we don't believe we're heroes or anything like that, because we're not. We're certainly not. We're people that have done wrong. We don't want other people to go down the same path as we did. We want people to learn from our experiences, and we feel as though telling our story could help a few people. So yeah, that's the way in which I see it. But there are a lot of people out there that have reached out and said thank you for just spending a bit of time, giving them a bit of time, someone to listen to. Because I'm forever on my phone. If my phone pings off and someone wants help, then I don't think I've ever not replied.
If we bring it into football, I think if you had, a version of yourself talking to you as a player, when that problem, and it's a severe one, when you're gambling off, you're gambling, signing on fees and 30 grand and stuff like that, you'd probably look and go, you know what, I relate to this guy, I've got a problem. Sometimes, and I think this will happen quite a lot in football, it's that stage underneath where players probably don't feel like they've got a problem. They're gambling quite a bit, but they're like, yeah, but I can control it. I can stop tomorrow if I want. How do you find getting across to them people? Do you feel like there needs to be more awareness done, or more that football can do, or companies like you obviously doing some great work around it?
Yeah, we've had a number of players reach out and come forward about, I need help, I need this, I'm spending too much doing this, that and the other. I always think to myself, if I had me stood in front of me when I was 18, 19 years old and talking about the issues, would I have stopped? Would I have reached out? I'd like to think that I would have, but sometimes it takes players a year or two down the line to actually hit their rock bottom, potentially get released from the club that they're at, start earning less wages. And that's been a telltale sign. We've had players reach out over the pandemic as well. The pandemic's obviously hit people hard, that they've not been going to training on a regular basis. Their contract might be in jeopardy because the club's in financial difficulty. All of a sudden, they're trying to earn a few quid by gambling. They got themselves into a bigger issue. So there's all different factors. And I think to myself that the more people like yourselves, obviously you do great work with players and clubs, businesses and stuff like that, because I've been part of it. But I think the more that players can be educated in every aspect is important. But the problem that I find, and it really bugs me, is that you speak to a club and you say, we can offer you this session. And they go, oh, it's hard to fit that into a player's timetable. Like, come on, like they train from 10:30 till 12. They might do an afternoon session, but the afternoon session, you're still finished by 1:45, latest. So I think to myself, if you can't find 45 minutes to listen to a guy that struggled with mental health, or listen to a guy that struggled with financial difficulty, who's made bad decisions, then you're not helping, or you're not got the best interests of those players at heart. Like, there needs to be more done, and there needs to be more openness, I guess, to people coming in and telling their stories.
And I think as well as that, I know you're going into clubs, but I think a big thing that I've noticed being a retired footballer now is when you retire from football, and I've spoken to loads of different people about it, they're often the ones that are chasing highs. So it might be women, it might be gambling, it might be drinking, some might be drugs, it might be anything like that. But some of these people are then finding themselves with, if you've retired at 35 and you're a Premier League footballer, you're very well off. You've got a lot of time in your hands, you're bored, you've got money in your bank, you're chasing a high and you get a bit of adrenaline. Some people might not gamble their whole career, but when it comes to the end of it, that might, be when the issue starts.
I think as well, one of the things I was thinking of the other day, you do this BTEC diploma in sport, right, when you're in the youth team, which is good. Like, it gives you an opportunity. I used it to go to university. But why aren't they doing something more niche? I mean, like, do a barbering course, or do a do their B badge, the coaching badges, or something that they can actually use it for when they come out of football. Because you find a lot of players go and do their coaching badges after they finish playing. All right, do something productive with it in the time that they are playing. I think that this BTEC National Diploma in Sport is just like a tick box. Whereas I know that Chelsea are kind of changing around what they do. I do believe that they're obviously choosing career pathways for players now. If football doesn't work out, then you've got your barbering course, you've got your electrician's license, whatever it may be. And I think that's what's more relevant. You need to change with the times, but these clubs are still stuck in their old ways. It shouldn't have taken me to get to 27 to go and do a university degree, but it did. My mum used to try and get me to do it every single season. And it was only when Vincent Kompany came out in the paper and said that he was doing one, my mum left me the paper on the side and she said, if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for you. And I was just like, yeah, fair enough. But I didn't, and I met him last year in Belgium. I was doing my talk out there at Anderlecht, and I was chatting to him after, and I said about my story and stuff, and he asked me a few questions. I said, I actually did my degree because of you. I said, you've done it in business management, I think it was. And he was just like, yeah. I said, no, you're an inspiration for me to do that. I said, and I got my degree off the back of it. And he said, that's what I wanted to go public about it. And it works for people like me, that I thought to myself, if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me, for sure.
I know you're 5.5 years, you've not placed a bet. What are some of the techniques, especially early on, that you use when you do get that urge, or you do find yourself thinking about gambling, or you might see people gambling on a coach, or you might see, a betting promotion, something like that? What are some of the things that you've used and what you help others with?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I've always got this little voice in my head, and like I said, it's my dad telling me that he was going to disown me, and my mum would do the same. I know now that if a doctor said to me, you have one more cigarette, if you're a smoker, if you have one more cigarette, you're going to die, you wouldn't have another cigarette. It's as simple as that, because you want to live your life. And I see gambling in the same way as that. I think to myself, if I have one more bet, it might not be as drastic as that I'm going to die, but I'll get back into my old habits. And I know that I've completely changed in every aspect of life since I put gambling down. Everything seemed more positive. My relationships have seemed positive. And I think that Matt struck it a minute ago when he said about one thing you realised is, or one thing I've taken from this, is that I couldn't have relationships. I love having relationships with people, whether it be my mum, my dad, my girlfriend, my friends, my football manager, my teammates. I like having that connection. And I was so disconnected for a long time because of gambling. And I don't like being by myself, because I find that when I'm by myself, I make bad decisions. I feel lonely. I go to a dark place. And yeah, I think now that if I did ever have any urge to gamble, the first thing I would do is that I've got a lot of support network out there with the people that I work with that have lived the same life as me. I could ring them up and say, listen, I'm having really bad urges to gamble here, and he'd talk me out of it. It's almost like talking someone down from a bridge. It's no different. So I'm lucky that I'm well connected now, and I've got the good support network out there, I guess.
Brilliant. Well, Scott, it's been a privilege to hear your story. It's a sad story at certain points, but ultimately for me, it's really uplifting. I think the work that you do, I think the work that Epic do, is magnificent and so important. So it just remains for me to say thank you for being sharing your football journey.
No, thanks to you and Fraser for having me. I think, like you say, a lot of people see it as it's a sad story at times, but I think now if you looked at me with perspective, I'm happier than ever. So there's people that are worse off than me, people that are still going through the life that I used to live now. So it pains me to see those people as well. So if anyone listens to this that is struggling, then reach out and we can obviously help each other.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Football Journeys, and thank you to all those who supported us. Do come and find us on social media at JourneysPod on both Twitter and Instagram, where we'll be sharing more content. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us on footballjourneys@b5consultancy.com or visit our webpage b5consultancy.com/footballjourneys. Please do like and subscribe. If you feel we deserve a 5-star rating, then please give us one. The more successful this podcast is, the better chance we have of producing more episodes and further series.